Good morning, Year 12. So I did the vote on Instagram. Thank you for the idea for the poll, Annabelle, and it was overwhelmingly yes. Let's do a recap video with just one vote for no. So I hear you know you are valid, and we'll be moving on to our next poem super quickly. But for today, I really thought there would be value, especially reading over your responses that I've had so far. They're phenomenal, so detailed, displaying a wealth of understanding. I'm so proud of you all, especially learning this from home. In a way, it was ideal really that Blake was the text that we were, Songs of Innocence and Experience was the text that we had to learn from home, because it's so manageable in terms of there being individual poems that we can tackle in each lesson. So much more manageable than a novel. We're in a good place. So Blake, where are we so far? This session is going to recap the key ideas that we've explored to date with the poems that we have already covered in the anthology. Now, we have this half term to wrap Blake up, and then in the last half term we'll be moving on to coursework, which again is kind of ideal to do from home. So everything here for you guys in literature from home is manageable. So let's take it on a positive. So where are we so far? So a recap of the key ideas explored in relation to this social and political protest text. And then what I want you to do, see the note in green, as I go through these slides, I'm moving in chronological order through the homework, the Easter homework task. So have yours in front of you, take a different colour pen, and maybe just make some notes to edit or add some of the ideas therein expressed. What I've done is I've read through the homework sent to me already. Thank you for those. You know who you are. Amazing dedication. And I've taken my favourite bits from all of them and sort of added in my ideas as well. So this is a team effort, just again to show how brilliant you all are, and it's testament to your hard work. So this simple stuff, let's get this out of the way really quickly. Songs of Innocence was first published in 1789, but the key thing is that the two collections were published together in 1794. That's really your key date. Okay, if we're going to remember any date at all, it's 1794. Okay, with the publication of the two texts together. Now, why is this? Just take a moment. We know that innocence and experience are opposite ends of a spectrum, okay, of a dichotomy. And Blake came to the realization, of course, that having them published separately did not serve the message, the moral teaching that he was attempting to communicate, and that is that we must seek to reunite the contraries, heaven and hell, okay, the good, the bad, the innocent, the experienced, okay, any of the contraries, either way, they need to be, the young, the old, they need to be together, united. The contraries need to coexist. Why? For balance. Why? For progression within society. Okay, remember, he called that state of the two coexisting organised innocence. And so in a way, if you take the whole collection published in 1794, we have this physical example, a very physical example of organised innocence. Okay, what's the answer? Somewhere in between, a compromise, a balance. Okay. So for Songs of Innocence, the key themes that you guys picked up, and I look for the most common, I've placed in red the ones that are specifically social and political protest themes. Okay, so that's why I've put those ones in red there. So for Songs of Innocence, we've got the harmony of nature, the naivety and the blinkeredness of our poetic voices to corruptive forces. That's quite a Marxist idea that individuals can't see their own oppression, and so they just carry on. They carry on living in an oppressed state. They carry on being exploited by those institutions. They are naive. okay, to it. They do not see it. And that is quite a common social and political protest trope. Okay, so that's quite key. You spoke about the perception of the creator, of God. In Innocence, he is meek and mild. There is this over-the-top, hyperbolic sense of joy in Innocence as well. I suppose that links right back to being naive. To your own exploitation. You also then have the symbiosis of the older and the younger generation in Innocence, them working together. And then lastly, a very claustrophobic preservation of innocence, okay, as well. Now, Songs of Innocence themes, we had quite a lot more, to be honest, in terms of themes that were specifically social and political protest. So look at the version of God in Experience. He is actually the exact opposite to meek and mild. He is tyrannical. He is malevolent. Okay, he is the eye in the sky. Thou shalt not. Okay, so that's, again, usually the same in many social and political protest texts. There is some sort of force, some malevolent, tyrannical force of oppression. Within The Handmaid's Tale, it's obviously Gilead and its founders. Okay, we also have within Experience the idea of institutionalized religion, the church being the site of exploitation. Again, as a social and political protest trope, it's there in The Handmaid's Tale as well. Okay, Gilead is largely founded upon so-called religious Old Testament principles, fundamentalist ideas. In Experience, you have the decaying of childhood innocence, but largely you have that suppression, that holding down of innocence. It's not allowed to thrive. Okay, what exists instead is jealousy and shame and secrecy. Okay, so those in red are your social and political protest tropes for the collection so far. You might want to write those down if you didn't have them, or just highlight them in your notes if you did. Okay, I just wanted to recap what AQA tell us are the key social and political tropes of Blake's work. Okay, so you might not have this in your notes right now. This isn't number 2, this is just an extra addition that I've popped in on the slides. So one of the key things that AQA say in their overview of the text is that this is a social and political protest text because within it our writer, just like Atwood of course, she champions and he champions freedom, okay, freedom of the individual. That's why we have The Handmaid's Tale through the narrative perspective of Offred, a handmaid. Okay, in the lower rungs of the hierarchy of Gilead, she is given a voice, quite literally, within her fictive autobiography. Okay, within his text, Blake, he champions the individual by having his poetic voices largely be children. Okay, largely children, one of the most oppressed fractions within society. Okay, and the working classes as well. What he does in his work is he condemns those who have just excessive power, too much power, that leads to corruption. We see that in Gilead as well, with the commander, with Serena Joy, okay, with some of the aunts as well. Okay, so in terms of our social and political protest tropes, I'm trying to connect The Handmaid's Tale in where I can. They are so key to start with. Now, Blake specifically, he obviously has a massive abhorrence of and hatred of oppression of all forms. Remember, oppression is kind of a societal force where people are forbidden or stopped from enacting their freedoms. That's what oppression is, to hold people down, to prevent them from enjoying liberty. So there's loads of forms of oppression in Blake. Sexual oppression, just look at the Sick Rose. Spiritual oppression, the oppression of the creative imagination and of the individual. Okay, that's pretty much littered in all of his poems. Okay, within Gilead, of course, there's sexual and spiritual oppression. They cannot, though, in Gilead suppress the creative imagination. We see that through Offred's very detailed use of language. Not only in the game of Scrabble, but in her narration specifically. And again, Gilead attempts to oppress the individual, but we know that oppression by society is never absolute. I mean, just look in Blake's work, look at The Little Vagabond. Remember I told you that his perspective was so subversive for being a child that belonged to the underbelly, the lower working class, and being a child. Okay, he was so hyper aware of the the church's oppressions. So in both texts, even though they express a hatred of oppression and they show how it's rampant within society, our poetic voices or our narrative voices, they manage to find ways of rebelling and subverting, also political tropes. Just to give you a really verbose phrase, it's there in red. Blake upheld deep-rooted anti-establishment ethos. That's a really fancy way of just saying he attacked the church. He attacked it not literally, with the bombs or whatever, but with his words, with his creative his creative works. He attacked their actions, their motivations, and how legitimate they were, the right they had to rule. Of course, within the narrative, Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, she herself is, anti-establishment in terms of those establishments that seek to oppress the individual. And so her narrative is a massive attack on the actions, motivations, and legitimacy of modern day rulers, presidents and those in government, and how they choose to wield their power. Just remember this though, in Blake's time, it was a deeply conservative government. It's also a reactionary government. That means that the government that was in place were reacting to the French and the American revolutions that were happening across the globe, and that Tory government, they themselves were doing whatever they could in their oppression of their people, because they were scared that it would happen there on their home turf. So because of that fear of subversion, that fear of rebellion, that fear of uprising, Blake's Tory government, their conservative government, brought in some real harsh policy. Real harsh policy making that kept their people in line. So some examples from the poem of some of the social and political protest key themes. I spoke about the naivety and the blinkeredness of our poetic voices in innocence to their corruptive forces, and you guys gave me these ones: the lamb, little lamb, who made thee? The nurse's songs of innocence, the little ones leaped and shouted and laughed, and the shepherd of innocence, he shall follow his sheep. We looked also at a experience kind of social and political protest trope, and that was the exploitation of religion, of institutionalized religion. Holy Thursday came up pretty much for all of you. Is this the holy thing to see? In a rich and fruitful land, babes reduced to misery. And of course the chimney sweeper came up again too, a little black thing amongst the snow. So the exploitation specifically of children here, due to institutionalized religion, ensuring that the status quo remained and that there was no real remedy to society's problems, especially for the very young. So thank you for those. There's some other examples as well. Now, on the next few slides, there's quite long answers that are going to be seen here. So I probably won't read it out to you, because you can pause this slide and check your answer as we go along. But I just want to give you a summary of each. So question 4 asks you, what were Blake's views on religion, on organised religion specifically? And what is the term? How might we define his views? Well, he is anti-establishment. His views are anti-establishment. He is a humanitarian. He is a liberal, highly subversive. So any of those phrases would have worked, but anti-establishment was the phrase you might have used. So I always tell you, remember, Blake was Christian. He wasn't an atheist. He believed in God, in the Holy Trinity. But he just didn't believe in society's very fallen and experienced vision of the Creator, of God. The one that the church was peddling, the Old Testament type. I always say it, the guy in the sky, in a superior position above all, belching out his thou shalt not conditions. He felt, of course, that the church that was there just served to ensure that people remained in their place within the hierarchy. No solution was offered. And one of you gave this example here, so thank you for this. You said that there is frequent satire used to ridicule the church. Okay, remember, satire is poking fun at their behaviours. The little vagabond came up as well. I mentioned it just a moment ago, in which it attacks the legitimacies and the authority figures, such as modest Dame Lurch in the poem. It seems to be scolding the church for how it fails to care for the poor. Okay, institutionalised religion is of course attacked in London, it's attacked in the Chimney Sweeper, it's attacked in Holy Thursday, and all of them seem to highlight how the people were trapped in a cycle of poverty. Okay, and the church was certainly not this benevolent, accommodating institution that sought to aid the ailing. I really liked this statement at the bottom. I'm not really saying whose they are in case you're embarrassed or you don't want me to, but I certainly know who you are. I really like this statement at the bottom. You said that Blake viewed organised religion as an agent of social control, lax in life and liberation. Just love that phrase. He saw Christianity as a distortion of true spiritual life, as it changed spirituality into a system of moral laws which bound people in shame or in fear of punishment. And I think that sums it up beautifully. So if you don't have that, you might want to pop that in your little notes that you're adding as we go along. Beautiful summation, guys, of Blake's views on organised religion. So what about child labour then? Let's make it nice and sharp. Someone provided me with this answer. I read through the ones I had, and I just chose the ones that I thought were clearest for a presentation, but they were all brilliant. They were all spot on, and you will be awarded for them, year 12. So this individual said here, Blake abhorred the exploitation of children's labour during the Industrial Revolution. Blake believed in the innocence of childhood pleasures and felt that children were driven out of these prematurely and into the world of work. The Chimney Sweeper by William Blake expresses the difficult lives of children, of those working children. As the title reveals, the children are cleaning chimneys all day long in unimaginable conditions, often sacrificing their lives to the deadly trade. So I added this bit at the bottom. While society is certainly often to blame, it's society, I will say, he also highlighted that parents or parental figures, they had responsibility, and he highlights their failures to care and nurture children's physical and emotional needs as well. So whilst we can always bring it back ultimately to society, individuals have responsibility as well, guys. Okay, absolutely key. So what about Blake's views on formal education? Now, one of you emailed me and said, I'm a bit stuck on this one, miss, because whilst we can make some real educated statements about this based upon what we've studied, we haven't really looked at a poem yet that captures this idea of the formal education system nice and sharply. And that brings me nicely on to the next video that I will be doing, which will be The School Boy. I did ask this person to go and have a look at the poem before we've studied it for their answer. And they gave us what was written in red, but I just wanted to read out the first bit. So Blake rallied strongly against formal education. This is obviously similar to his distaste for institutionalised religion too. He believed that formal education constrained the creative imagination and it limited individuality and spirituality. Learning of one's own accord would make education much more enjoyable and limitless, especially if it's amongst nature. So thank you to that individual that inspired me with those ideas. And then you said here, The Schoolboy is a poem about a young boy who's at school during the summer. He can't focus in class because he wants so badly to play outside and enjoy the weather. He feels like a songbird trapped in a cage. Towards the poem's end, the boy wonders how children can grow and thrive if they're not allowed to enjoy the summer. Blake believed that formal education was another restriction of freedom of thought and access to symbiosis with nature. So I just added that last bit on, but some really beautiful ideas there for number 6. Okay, the last of the shorter answers was what was Blake's views on the Industrial Revolution? Again, I've been inspired by someone's response here and just edited bits here and there. But, remember, he is a romantic with a capital R. So clearly, year 12, he is not going to cherish any positive, beliefs in, largely in the Industrial Revolution, because for him, it was a movement that took away from creativity, from subjectivity, from feeling, from the inner world. The inner world is what he cherished. So the Romantic movement was actually a reactionary one after the Industrial Revolution and Scientific Revolution. That's where Romanticism was born, because they felt we need to do something, we've got to do something. Okay, the Industrial Revolution, it transformed the world for the worse, they believed. As is written here, there was rapid industrialization, urbanization, overcrowding, and all of that was, the slums were created, breeding grounds for epidemic diseases. And these slums, there was no sanitary conditions, there was limited, sewers, as the individual is written here, which contaminated the drinking water. They were just, the cities were filled with manufacturing plants, and we had child labour, no forms of worker protection, people working ridiculously long hours a day, 12 to 16 hours a day each week. So this individual summed it up here in red, and I thought it was so brilliant. Blake's work reflects the human cost of the Industrial Revolution. This is most evident, of course, in the poem London, where he keeps using, that reference to the chartered streets. Okay, and we know that chartered there is not only showing images of restriction and binding, but it's also showing the revolution's effect on society. Okay, it makes nature something that is, stagnant, passive, marginalised, and all that reigns is mass urbanisation, mass industrialisation, and so mass exploitation. Okay, I gave you a phrase here, didactic. I've used this phrase before, but maybe it's not part of your vocabulary just yet because we haven't used it too much. And so the definition here, is it's meant to teach something. Okay, if you have a didactic piece of writing, or if you say text is didactic, pretty much answers all of the texts we study year 12, hence why they're chosen. Okay, they have a moral lesson. Okay, now I took this statement that someone said here, I thought this was brilliant in terms of why they feel the text is didactic. I'm not going to read it out, but I want to just draw your attention to what's in red here and here, because I think these are A-star ideas. Okay, what he's trying to teach us through the two collections and by bringing the two collections together. Okay, so pause the video now and have a little read, because that is some superb stuff. Okay, we move on to the questions that asked you to connect The Handmaid's Tale and Blake, which, although were tricky, I know you found them a little bit tricky, they are superb for preparing you for the demands of the exam itself, which does ask you to, make connections between the texts in section C of paper 2. So this question said, what similarities are there between the religious authorities in Blake's poems and in The Handmaid's Tale? So again, I'm not going to read this out to you. You can pause the video. This is edited from an individual's answer, which I absolutely adored. But the key thing to remind you of is that Gilead, of course, is a totalitarian regime that is founded upon religiosity, religious ideas and customs, quite largely fundamentalist and Puritan ideas. So we have all of that in the first half, and then of course within Blake's work we have a society that is dominated by institutionalized religion as well. Who suffers in both instances? Well, the vulnerable, the young, the working classes, those within a lower position within the hierarchy. Okay, so religion in both texts is this authoritative agency that withholds liberty for the individual. Okay, so that's my summary of what's written there, but there's so much detail here, so you want to read it as well. Pause it please now. Okay, the next question was probably the trickiest. It asked you, do you feel that Blake and The Handmaid's Tale have a collectivist or an individualist feel. So collectivist means that it speaks for, you know, everyone or a wider group of people, and then individualist means we only have access to a kind of a small scale interpretation. So the answer here was really nice. There was loads of really nice answers. A lot of you came to the conclusion that although Blake's work has a very collectivist appeal, in that he highlights lots of trends, lots of similarities throughout his collection to speak of society on a larger scale. I mean, as poems, we don't actually have individual characters, really. We have a few that crop up, but not always as poetic voices. So the child, the lamb, the nurse. But to be honest, his work is quite collectivist in that it is attempting to teach parallel themes and trends. He's attempting to teach, about society's flaws on a grand scale. Remember as well, and this person said this, that in Blake's time, the authority figures didn't give people individuality. So it almost wouldn't be right if his poems had really distinct poetic voices that had freedom of thought, because it wouldn't reflect what was going on at the time. The Handmaid's Tale is quite individualistic in that, of course, we have Offred, it's this fictive autobiography, but we do get a collectivist feel every so often through the additions of Moira's embedded narrative and through the retrospections as well. So it's not quite as clear-cut for each of the texts. Okay, what about the views of children in the two texts, and how are they similar, how are they different? Sorry, I've got my email on the background, I should have closed it. Either way, this is a really nice idea here. So in both The Handmaid's Tale and Blake's poetry, children are viewed as commodities, as things, right, as objects used to reap societal gains, so used to benefit society. So within The Handmaid's Tale, children are forced into this system that seems to predetermine their destiny, confines them to that restrictive regime, a life of sexual slavery or corrupt religious morals. So in other words, if you were born prior to the regime, you would have been taken from your parents and distributed to commanders' households. If you were old enough, you might have become a handmaid or an aunt. Either way, you were fed into a system of corruption and slavery. Really ultra-conservative regime that views children especially as a method of control, and that's the same within Blake's work, isn't it? Okay, children are the sites for exploitation within his world. So there's loads there. I really like that note at the bottom that even in Blake's work, that is, of course, a document of his contemporary world, and so the children's fates are sealed and irreversible. But within Margaret Atwood's dystopia, as it is a dystopia, we still have power now as we read it to take action to avoid any predetermined exploitation or the fates of children in our time. Okay. Yep, this is the last one. We're nearly there. You're doing so well to listen to all of this. But this is your work. It's phenomenal that you're able to get to this point, having done this largely from home. And, you are a real testament to the hard efforts that have been put in across the school. So thank you. So the last one was, both Blake and Atwood take issue with corrupt power being the source of society's problems, and you gave me some great example as well. So within Blake's London, this individual said here, there's a lot of blame upon the establishments of his time, the institutions of his time, because the soldier, his blood runs down palace walls. And you did a beautiful bit of analysis here. So the Nam blood creates this imagery of a stain and shows how people in power are tainted, stained by their very self-interested actions, and they can't seem to escape it. The victims can't escape it either. During Blake's time, there was a large gap in social class. Those in power oppressed those seen to be below them to keep the status quo in check. So clearly lots of corruption of power here. The blackening church, a nice imagery of corrupt power causing woe. We know about religion, as a way to keep people passive. just want to go down. I'm not going to read all of it, and you need to pause it and read it. It's really good. But Atwood also makes, you know, similar ideas, because there's lots of hypocrisy and corruption in The Handmaid's Tale as well, in terms of authority figures. We've got the commander and that very infamous line, "If your dog dies, get another." We know that he had a previous handmaid. We know that she killed herself. The idea that the handmaids as well are disposable, like the children in Blake's time. Okay, so both texts filled with hypocrisy, filled with dismissal of human life and value, and authority figures seem to be able to play with human life as if it is a toy. Love that statement. Okay, so just beautiful work. Once again, you'll probably want to pause the video here to give this a full read, because it is phenomenal. Okay, so that comes to the end of my feedback. This works as feedback for the work you're sending me. Okay, so don't expect me to send individualized emails to each of you after having done this video. It does take about 3 hours to sort videos out. It's an awful lot of time, but I will of course be awarding you and looking at the work and reading through it as well. So please expect awards to be on the system. I just want to thank you to those that sent their work nice and early, because it really made this such a rich presentation. Your ideas are so unique, so valuable, and I love that they made this video. We'll probably do something like this again when we finish Blake, just to summarise the key ideas. I hope that's been okay. Please feel free to take your time with this, go back over it, watch it again. I know it is filled to the brim with ideas and it might be overwhelming, so just take it in little bits. Either way, you're fantastic. I'm missing you a lot. Please, you know, message me if you need anything, and let me know if you have any requests as well. But the next video will be The Schoolboy, so you might want to give it a read ahead of Friday's lesson. Okay.